In Pena-Rodriguez v. Colorado, the United States Supreme Court addressed the conflict between a criminal defendant's Sixth Amendment right to a fair and impartial jury and the established rule that a jury's deliberations cannot be used to challenge a verdict. Miguel Pena-Rodriguez was charged with 3 felonies arising out of the alleged molestation of 2 girls. During jury screening and repeatedly during jury selection, jurors were asked whether they had any reservations about their impartiality. None of the jurors voiced any concerns or expressed any racial bias. The jury convicted Pena-Rodriguez of harassment and unlawful sexual contact, but failed to reach a decision on the 3rd charge. Immediately after the jury was dismissed, 2 jurors told the defense counsel that another juror, identified as H.C., expressed racial stereotypes about the defendant and his alibi witness. H.C. told the other jurors, quote, "I think he did it because he's Mexican, and Mexican men take whatever they want," unquote. Counsel reported this to the trial judge. Under the court's supervision, the lawyers obtained sworn affidavits from the 2 jurors who'd reported the statements. The trial court acknowledged that H.C. appeared to be racially biased, but denied Pena-Rodriguez's motion for a new trial. The court relied on Colorado Rule of Evidence 606B, which, like Federal Rule of Evidence 606B, prohibits jurors from testifying about statements made during deliberations. A divided Court of Appeals panel affirmed, as did a split Colorado Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court granted cert to decide whether a criminal defendant's Sixth Amendment right to a fair and impartial jury superseded Rule 606B if a juror expressed racial animus. Justice Kennedy, writing for a 5-justice majority, ruled that if a juror's comments clearly indicate that the juror relied on racial animus to convict, courts must consider whether the bias denied the defendant the right to a fair and impartial jury. Kennedy first examined the history of the no impeachment rule, which was eventually adopted in Federal Rule of Evidence 606B in 1975. The no impeachment rule protected jurors from scrutiny and gave jury verdicts stability and finality. The rule was quite strict and had few exceptions. Throughout the years, the court has given Rule 606B great weight. The court upheld one verdict against allegations that jurors consulted newspaper reports during deliberations, another criminal verdict despite jurors deliberating while drunk and high, and a civil verdict despite evidence that the jury foreperson had a pro-defendant bias before the trial began. But the court also considered the, quote, imperative to purge racial prejudice from the administration of justice, unquote. After the U.S. Civil War, the central objective of the 14th Amendment was to eliminate government involvement in racial discrimination. Kennedy concluded that racial discrimination is especially offensive in the administration of justice. Additionally, juror bias erodes the jury's important role as a check on the state's exercise of power. The court noted that its previous juror misbehavior cases involved anomalous behavior by one juror, and that the remaining jurors were presumed to have followed their oaths. Further, those cases didn't involve accusations of racial bias. But racial bias is more insidious because it implicates historical, constitutional, and institutional concerns. Moreover, pretrial examination of prospective jurors is often inadequate to identify bias. Before a racial bias inquiry can overcome Rule 606B, however, there must be a clear showing that the juror's statements demonstrate that the racial animus was sufficient to cast serious doubt on the fairness and impartiality of the juror's deliberations and verdict. The court reversed the judgment of the Colorado Supreme Court. Justice Thomas dissented, arguing that the court's holding was inconsistent with the original understanding of the Sixth and 14th Amendments. When both amendments were adopted, the no impeachment rule was firmly entrenched in American law. Thus, both amendments incorporate the no impeachment rule as part of the rights those amendments protect. Therefore, Thomas argued that the Sixth and 14th Amendments provide no basis for modifying the no impeachment rule. Justice Alito's dissent, which was joined by Justice Thomas and Chief Justice Roberts, pointed out that jurors depend on the confidentiality of their deliberations to arrive at verdicts. Post-verdict scrutiny of juror deliberations could inhibit full and open discussion in the jury room. Alito further argued that other mechanisms, such as questioning and jury selection, are sufficient to reveal and remove biased jurors before they're seated. Pena-Rodriguez represents a major shift in juror bias jurisprudence and creates new potential for post-verdict jury challenges going forward.